Hello, I'm Chad Greenwood, Assistant Area Director with the Madison OSHA office. Welcome to the 2013 Utility Damage Prevention Meeting. With me today is Jim Lutz. Jim is a Compliance Assistant Specialist with the Milwaukee area office. Some of the topics we're going to cover today include an update on the public sector workers. We're also going to talk about methods of cave-in protection for employees, including sloping and benching. We'll update you on some of the new standards that are out there from OSHA, including the most frequently cited standards, and give you some resources on how you can get more information after today. Jim, what kind of an update do you have on public sector workers?
Thanks, Chad. We recently had an opportunity to sit down with the folks from the Department of Safety and Professional Services over in Madison for a quick OSHA update.
Public workers need to be aware of the fact that safety and health issues are covered by the Department of Safety and Professional Services. Administrative codes, formerly under the Department of Commerce, now use the SPS designation for the Department of Safety and Professional Services. So rather than complying with COM 32, public employers must comply with SPS 332. The inspection unit is still located in the Safety and Buildings Division. Last year, we found that the department was looking at updating the Public Employee Safety and Health Standards, which would incorporate a large part of the 2010 OSHA standards. By statute, the state is required to provide the same level of protection afforded to private sector workers through the OSHA standards. Our discussion with the department officials found that, as of our filming, the project has been put on hold. If you are a public sector employee and have questions about workplace safety, you can contact your local inspector or the program manager. A contact sheet is available to you today.
Over the past couple of years, we've demonstrated several different methods of trench protection. 2 years ago, we demonstrated trench boxes. Last year, we demonstrated shoring systems. This year, we're going to be looking at sloping and benching.
That's right. Sloping and benching is another option that you can use to protect employees from cave-ins while working in trenches. All trenches over 5 feet in depth have to have some type of cave-in protection. Keep in mind, though, that even excavations that are less than 5 feet should have an examination by a competent person to determine that the trench is not in danger of caving in.
That's a good point, Chad. Over the last couple of years, in the evaluations that we did receive, a couple people did have questions on what is a competent person.
Well, a competent person is one who has both knowledge and authority on the job site. Now, that knowledge is going to be obtained by their training, by their experience, maybe some education, but it's important that that competent person is knowledgeable about the protective systems that you're using on the site. For example, if you're going to be sloping and benching, that person needs to know how to do a soil classification and apply the appropriate slope. But another important aspect that people sometimes forget about is the actual authority. Typically, the employer or somebody has to designate that individual to be competent to have the authority over the work site so they can make those decisions and stop work if they need to make the appropriate corrective actions. Once you choose that you're going to use sloping and benching as your method of cave-in protection while working in a trench, a competent person is going to do a soil analysis to determine whether or not they have stable rock, a type A soil, a type B soil, or even a type C soil. In order to do that analysis, they have to do at least one visual analysis and one manual analysis. Additionally, you're going to want to look around the trench, see if there's any existing utilities or any other signs to indicate that soils have been previously disturbed. Also, as you're excavating, you'd want to look at the trench itself and see, are you getting into where you've got maybe water that's seeping into the trench. Once you do that visual test, you want to do a manual test also. There are a few different manual analysis that contractors typically use to determine the soil type. One manual analysis is used to determine whether or not you have a cohesive soil. That's commonly referred to as the ribbon test, which means you basically take a sample of the soil and roll it in your hands and try to thread out a ribbon that's about an 1/8 inch diameter. And if you're able to do that and take a 2-inch length of that ribbon and hold on to it without it breaking, you would determine that you then have a cohesive soil. Other manual tests that you can do to determine the compressive strength of the soil. You can use a couple tools with that, or you can use your thumb to do what's called a thumb penetration test, where you actually take an undisturbed sample of cohesive soil and push your thumb into that soil. A more definitive test is to actually measure the compressive strength, and you can do that with a torvane shear, or a pocket pentrometer. And with that pocket pentrometer, you take the pentrometer and push it into a undisturbed sample of the soil and take a reading. And if your reading is less than 0.5 tons per square foot, you have a type C soil. If it's between 0.5 and 1.5, you have a type B soil. And if it's better than 1.5, you could have a type A soil.
Shannon, when we have layered soils or stratified soils, how do you classify that?
Well, it's very common that you're going to have multiple layers in a trench. You may have a trench that's 10 feet deep, and the top 5 feet is maybe a type B clay material, and the bottom 5 feet is a type C sandy material. You're going to want to classify those layers individually to determine what types of soil you have. You have to slope it according to the weaker layer. Now, any trench that's over 20 feet in depth, the sloping system should be designed by a registered professional engineer. For trenches that are less than 20 feet deep, based on that soil analysis you've done, you can assign the appropriate slopes. Now, if you have a type A soil, your slope should be at least 3/4 to 1. That's for every 1 foot of depth, you have to cut that trench wall back 3/4. So if you had a 10-foot deep trench, you would have to cut that trench wall back approximately 7.5 feet. For type B soils, you're going to have a 1-to-1 slope, and for type C soils, you're going to have a 1.5-to-1 slope. An important thing to remember when determining the appropriate slope is if you're going to measure your slope, you need to start measuring from the bottom edge of that excavation or that trench wall and measure up. In addition to sloping, another option you have is to actually bench the trench. Now, a bench is actually a situation where you're going to step up the wall of the trench. And there's a couple different benches you can do. There's a simple bench and there's a multiple bench. A simple bench is where you put in one bench where you can come up vertically approximately 4 feet, then you go horizontally approximately 4 feet to make like a step. If your trench is deeper than 4 feet, then from there you can apply the appropriate slope moving up the rest of the way of the trench. Another option you have is the multiple bench, where you would do the same thing, except that when you make that first horizontal step of 4 feet, now you're going to start benching up, but you got to make sure that you keep those benches behind that slope line. So if you've got that type B soil, you are still maintaining that slope, it's just that you're putting steps in. One key point to remember is that benching is something that's not allowed in type C soils. So for example, this trench we have here today, we've analyzed the soil as a type C, and we would not be able to bench in this type of soil. Let's take a quick review. When sloping or benching, you do have a number of options. Once the soil is classed, you can excavate a simple slope, single bench, multiple bench in the proper type of soil, or you can use a combination of protection factors with sloping and installing a box or shoring system. What we have set up here today is we have a trench that's approximately 5 feet in depth. We've got a trench box that's been set in there, and then it's been ramped on each side for access and egress. What we've done here now is we've taken the trench box out and we've sloped the trench back to the 1.5-to-1 slope that this type of soil would require, which you can see we're measuring with our trench pole and our angle indicator. Before you get in that trench, ensure it has been sloped, shielded, or properly shored. Excavated dirt is at least 2 feet away from the edge. There is a safe way to exit, and that a competent person has inspected the trench for your safety.
Over the past year, OSHA has adopted 2 new standards. Number 1, we looked at our new hazard communication standard where we adopted the global harmonization system. Essentially what that deals with is that we're going to be looking at new material safety data sheets called SDSs, safety data sheets, and we're going to be looking at new ways of product labeling. Over the next several years, employers have responsibilities for training employees as well as collecting all those new safety data sheets. OSHA's provided some fact sheets as well as new quick cards to help employees understand the new requirements. Chad, the second change in this year's regulations was the adoption of the new crane standard.
Yeah, with the new crane standard that took effect just in the last couple of years here, the underground and construction industry was not covered by that standard. There's a change in the works right now where underground construction, which is primarily going to cover the tunneling industry, is now going to be covered under that crane standard.
Chad, what have the inspectors been finding this year?
Well, in the underground construction industry, the top 5 violations compliance officers have been finding include no protective systems utilized for trenches over 5 feet in depth, the soil or materials not being at least 2 feet from the edge of the excavation, no means of egress from the excavation, hard hats not worn, and sidewalk structures are not undermined unless supported. No protective system for working in trenches has been the most frequently cited violation last year, over 2 to 1 for the next most frequently cited. Almost half of the number 1 most frequently cited violations resulted in willful penalties issued to employers. For further information on excavation safety, OSHA provides a variety of resources through its webpage or through specific training programs offered through the Susan Harwood Grant Program. In addition, OSHA and the American Pipeline Contractors Association has also developed a fact sheet identifying excavation best practices for equipment operators and workers. You can also implement the safe digging practices as suggested by the Common Ground Alliance. On behalf of the Damage Prevention Council of Wisconsin, we'd like to thank Diggers Hotline, We Energies, and KS Energies for making this video possible. I'm Chad Greenwood. Have a safe year.